Trevor Smith, welcome to the pod, mate. Been a minute. What's going on?
Well, plenty. Good to see you, by the way. Yeah, lots happening. It's been a pretty busy a couple of years since we've done a year and a half or something. Anyway, lots changed in that time. Have you heard of artificial intelligence? It's kind of a big deal.
Oh,
Talking about it.
yeah, it's just a little bit of a small space at the moment. Now, for everybody that's watching and listening, mate, just give a little bit of an intro, who you are, what you do, and what you look after at the moment.
Yeah, sure. I work at Microsoft Australia and New Zealand team, and I'm education industry executive. So background in education for many years, both K-12 leadership and higher ed as well. And so my role really is to work with lots of Catholic dioceses, departments of education, some schools as well, around kind of contextualizing how our technology at Microsoft can play a role in education, from classroom right up to sort of data analytics, and AI is obviously the flavor of the month. That's my current job.
Now, before we jump in, the topic of conversation is going to be around Copilot and Copilot in education specifically. But look, we've known each other for a long time. I was thinking, just preparing for this and just thinking back to how long we've kind of known each other. And we go back quite a long way. You were kind of instrumental in the early days of, secondary schools and implementing tablet PC programs and things like that. And I was just thinking that, we were both sort of, down there in Frankston High School, and then, running that sort of stuff. And you're where you are, I am where I am. And it's interesting it really wasn't that long ago, to be honest, but it's interesting to see how far things have progressed and what schools are actually doing now.
Yeah, it is interesting. It was kind of a bit of a cutting edge program back in the day. Not that, we were there right at its inception, like in 1992, but giving devices in the hands of kids was the first government school in the world to do so. It's pretty amazing stuff. And then when we worked together, we sort of evolved it into that tablet PC program. So kids had a stylus to do their work with, and, lots of pretty innovative curriculum applications of that. And so, that's it's really quite, the norm now. I suppose the vision back in the day was that we were doing something different. We used to have, as you remember, a gazillion visitors every month, coming to the school to see what was going on. And the kids were always really confused as to why on earth they had these visitors from overseas or from around the country coming into their classrooms, because it was normal for them to learn with a device and do their learning that way. But now it has truly become mostly, not all, but mostly sort of the norm to do that sort of stuff. So it is interesting of how things have come. And, the focus has always got to be on whether this technology actually adds anything useful for the teaching and learning process, for kids, really.
Now, you advocated with the stylus and tablets and things like that over and above normal laptop devices. Is that still, you're talking about the norm there? Are you talking about the norm being a device, or the norm being a tablet writable device?
There's a combination out there of, it's certainly become more popular, the idea of having a stylus in a computer. The reality is that if you think of many of the subjects that kids learn at school, mathematics, science, so chemistry, physics, music, art, Japanese, Chinese, all of those subjects have a symbolic language, which is not very well communicated via a keyboard. And so if you actually think about it logically, a keyboard is really ill-suited to about half of the subjects that you could probably do in high school. So it makes a lot of sense to give kids the ability to write and annotate and mark things up, let alone the cognitive science behind the way you think when you are doing that kind of processing. Now, if we're giving kids 90% of their stuff digitally now, but, download this from the intranet, or get this from the LMS, or go to this shared OneDrive file, or use OneNote or whatever, if it's all coming at them digitally and they can't do things like annotate, mark up, underline, all of that stuff, then there's a fair bit of research out there that says that they're not doing it as well as they could be. Or they need to print more stuff off and do that in analog, because they can do that writing on top of it and around it, and then go back to digital when they want to go digital. So it kind of makes sense that it's the best of both worlds. And many schools are sort of going that way and making sure that they've got a stylus as part of the arsenal that they're giving their kids as a learning tool. makes a lot of sense. Doesn't mean they won't use pen and paper anymore, but at the moment it makes a lot of sense.
Mm. So moving on to, I guess, the flavour of the month, Copilot. Obviously, we've seen, that taking centre stage, especially around in the business context and that side of things.
Yeah.
Now, I understand it's been generally available now to EDU as well. We've had the 300 seat limit and all that sort of stuff dropped as well. So how, what's the state of play with Copilot? And we're speaking just before we hit record, there's obviously different flavors of Copilot and different types of Copilot. So what's the state of play with Copilot in general in Edu?
Well, Copilots. So one of the things is it's really important to understand the difference between the Copilots that are out there, right? There's Copilot for the web. So I think it used to be Bing Chat Enterprise.
Yeah.
Now there's Copilot for the web and Copilot with data protection, which is the Bing Chat Enterprise equivalent. So they're the versions of the tools that you can get and use, which are kind of the traditional ChatGPT style tools. When we start talking about Copilot in M365, which you need to now mention in every sentence, you can't just say Copilot and assume people know what you're talking about. Copilot in M365, then we're talking about it being embedded in Office, Outlook, but also more importantly than that, understanding the Microsoft Graph, which many people wouldn't understand what that is. I know that you do and other IT professionals do. The idea of the Office Graph is that sits underneath your M365 environment and is the web that connects all of the different people, who's who in the zoo, who's emailing who. All of that telemetry data that sits underneath can actually be accessed by Copilot for M365. So, for example, I might log in the morning to my Outlook and say, what are the most important things in my email box today? And it will go into my email, have a look at those. But it does that with a bit of context around what's important because it understands, for example, the hierarchy of people in my organization. So if the managing director of Australia New Zealand sends something, it's probably going to come up in my important list. If my manager sends something, it's probably going to come up in my important list. So it understands a bit of that context so it can get that and build that into the narrative. So the M365 Copilot is kind of like, having these generative AI tools embedded into the products like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, those sorts of things. But also probably more important than that is that access to the Microsoft Graph so it actually understands what you're doing. And so then you can do things more easily like, create me a PowerPoint presentation based on these minutes, these meeting notes, and this file, and use this as a template. And so when we saw those promotional videos about Copilot last, what would they have been, March from Microsoft, talking about those scenarios, they have become more real because of the M365 Copilot. But then there's other Copilots, right? There's security Copilots, and there's Copilots being built into Dynamics 365 platform, and there's security Copilots, and Copilot is kind of the overarching term for generative AI being built into our products. And then it's about horses for courses, which one do you need for what kind of purpose, I suppose. The other thing I will say about that is that, before I actually answer your question, is that Microsoft's a platform company, right? So we've also created an environment where you can build your own Copilots because you may have some specific purpose where you've got data sitting in a variety of places and you want to create some sort of Copilot. So you might use Copilot Studio or something like that to build your own Copilot for your organization, for your business, for your schools, for your industry. So that's really interesting. So the question was about, where's it at now in Edu? Well, obviously we're seeing huge uptake of the web, Copilot for the web. And we're starting to see from the start of this year, as you mentioned, that the 300 minimum seat for M365 Copilot went away. And is now, which was actually put in place because of the amount of, if you're going to use M365 Copilot in your environment, understanding that Office Graph is actually quite a big indexing task that has to happen underneath it. And so it's important that's all done. And originally we were just managing the scale of that. If every customer decided to turn on for 2 licenses, you still have to do the indexing. So anyway, that's been reduced now. And so we're starting to see lots of organizations get 10, 20, 30, 50 licenses, 70 licenses to start to roll out to certain types of workers in their organisation. They're sometimes teachers, sometimes they're office folks in like a Department of Education or a Catholic diocese, for example. And then, the onboarding and training around that is really important, because I think we've all probably experienced sitting in front of a Gen AI tool and just going, oh, this is just like a flashing cursor. What could I do? And then you run out of ideas really quickly about what you could actually do. So,
well, that's right. I mean, I've seen in business as well. I mean, people have just assigned licenses and just gone, hey, here you go. But then people don't really understand how to use it in the context of their day-to-day work. And it really needs to almost become habitual, and you need to use it every day to become proficient at it. There's a quote, or I can't remember where it came from, but around this generative AI stuff, and AI going to take people's jobs and all that side of things, but it's really the people that know how to use it that are going to take the jobs, right? Yeah. So being able to identify what processes and what things that it can help you with on a day-to-day basis, and then just keep repeatedly using that especially with education. What's the value proposition for, say, the teaching cohort? What are teachers going to get out of Copilot?
Copilot for M365 specifically?
Correct. Yes, Travis. Copilot for M365.
Just picking you up on the language there. Copilot for M365, I think there's a variety of different things. The main thing I think we should expect from Copilot for teachers is time saving.
Yeah.
It's actually about, which is a massive problem in education, right? There's not enough time. There's not enough teachers at the moment. We've got a massive crisis globally, not just in Australia, around teacher workforce. And it is about helping teachers to understand how they can save themselves some time. And so one of the things that they do is sift through gazillions of emails while they've been in 5 out of 6 lessons they're teaching today. Their inbox is full of 40 different things. Being able to get summaries of things is really useful. Like, there's a feature also in M365 Copilot in your Outlook box, which allows you to look at an email thread and go get a summary by Copilot. Now, we've all had this situation, right, where there's been a thread going on that should have been a Teams chat but isn't, and so they go back and forth via email, and there's like 15 responses, and then Daniel gets looped in at the end saying, Daniel, what's your opinion on this? And you're like, well, the only possible way I can have an opinion on this is to go to the bottom and start to work out what on earth this thread's about. And so, summary by Copilot will allow you to just get a summary, and it'll go, such and such said this and so said that, and then there was this, and then the idea is that you're supposed to be giving your opinion on blah. It's like, oh, great. Now you can go back and read the whole thing if you want, but that's a pretty good summary to give you a gist. Now, it's those kinds of things that can save us some time. The other things are, things like teachers spend a lot of time creating resources, really, assets for teaching and learning, or presentations for parent nights, all that sort of stuff, right? And so the ability to grab documents and turn them into PowerPoint decks, for example, is really, really a time saver. It's not going to look as good as you'll make it look, but, as we were talking about just off the recording before, it's just about getting yourself some of the way down a path. Sometimes when you're really time poor, it's like, I haven't even got time to start that because I know in 10 minutes I'll get nowhere, and I've only got 10 minutes. When you start to use Copilot and M365, you can get quite a way in 10 minutes. Like, you can get to 40% of the way there draft of something that you can then sort of build on when you do have a couple of hours to come back to it. So I think there's lots of time savings around efficiencies of the way we trawl through information, finding things. So just like literally an hour ago, I was trying to find something that I would have had to, I didn't know where this was. It was somewhere, it was a business case for something. And so I was able to just ask Copilot for work, which is part of M365 Copilot, to say, find me a file about blah, which I think such and such a person was involved in, and it had something to do with this. Yeah. And it was able to go through and find out, find that file for me, and I had it at my fingertips. Now, the alternative to that is to go and start searching through email, through shared files, maybe on OneDrive if you understand that that's a thing, searching your computer, searching your own OneDrive. There's lots of different places. Got Teams, it could be anywhere. So I think it's the time saving and efficiencies which are the biggest thing. The challenge, as you said, though, is about not just rolling this stuff out and going, oh, they'll be fine, they'll find ways. It's like, what are the best use cases? What are what are the top 10 things you should do? And, so that you can help people to save themselves some time in their context.
In the context, that's right. Do you think how far off, from a student perspective, you've been talking about sort of, school execs or admins, office staff or teachers. Do you think student use is far off, and how? Well, first of all, are there concerns about students, I guess, using this type of technology?
Yeah. Excuse me. The interesting thing about student access is that, so let's talk about access generally, right? M365 Copilot, the nice thing about it is that it is confined within your own environment. So it's, there's not going out to the web and all that sort of stuff, right? So you've already got some security in there because presumably you've got security on your network and your M365 environment. If we start to think about kids, so this is also true of Copilot for the web, right? Just the standard Copilot out there with or without data protection. Copilot with data protection is available now for 18 plus. So students or educators 18 plus, you get that as part of your A3 or A5 Microsoft licensing if you've got those SKUs. Students is still a bit of a murky area. Like it's 13 plus because you have to log in with a personal account, like a Microsoft account or whatever. It's the same sort of guidelines as ChatGPT and other generative AI tools out there. I think the real way that I think generative AI is going to surface up is obviously they're going to start using those tools when they're 13 plus or probably younger, as we know kids will do.
They are already, right?
Yep, yeah, that's right. Yep. So they'll use it. They'll use those kinds of tools. The second thing is that companies like us and others will be building generative AI into other products. So, for example, in Teams for Education, there's generative AI being built into there to do things to support teachers, but also learners. So in the learner side, there's stuff like, reading progress. A teacher sets an assignment, a student reads it to their computer. The AI will automatically assess omissions and repetitions of words and all that sort of stuff. A teacher can manually mark that if they want to. And then based on the words that the kid either couldn't pronounce, for example, a new passage can be generated using generative AI to give kids more practice in those kinds of words that they're struggling with. Now, for a teacher to do that, well, teachers wouldn't do that, right? Because you've got 25 kids if you're a primary school teacher and you've got 100 if you're a secondary school teacher. So you don't have time to do that sort of stuff. So this personalization at scale is going to be probably one of the biggest impacts of this. But I think students using it, and so it was really interesting. In South Australia, they released basically a version of ChatGPT or Copilot, but they built it in Azure OpenAI. So therefore it had additional protections around it so that they could be very comfortable that kids could use this very, very safely. And one of the things that they found was that the kids were a bit scared to use it because they thought they might be accused of cheating.
Right.
And so that was really interesting, right? Because the kids were like, oh, if I use this, I could get in trouble. And so then the teachers had to sort of say, oh, well, we'll come up with a traffic light system. Green is go for your life on generative AI. That's what we're using this for. We're using it to give you more ideas for your draft or whatever. Orange is, let's do it, but just be careful about this, or you have to make sure you cite this, or you have to do that. And red is no generative AI in this space. So their EdChat tool, which is basically sitting in an interface, allowing the kids to do it in their really safe and secure environment, is open to kids, but it's got some additional protections around it, and they can safely use it with those added protections. So it's a kind of, a bit of a ball of wool answer, but I think we'll probably see it being built into more and more products.
Do you think so? Is there much apprehension from school leaders, I guess, in making this available to kids? And is there much of education around actually using generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT or M365 chat or whatever it is? Is there much education, teaching kids how to actually use it?
Yeah. Yes, there is apprehension in it. And I think It's for all the right reasons that there's apprehension around it, right? The first thing we need to be really careful of is personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
That's no different to the web ever.
Well, and it's the same. And I have this conversation all the time about, security and data access, right? So now that Copilot's come on board, all of a sudden, people are starting to think, or is it going to have access to this, and that? Yep. Whereas in M365, you do a search and it's exactly the same thing, right? You're going to get back what you've got access to. But all of a sudden now, because it's AI, it's thought of as something different. Yeah, that's right.
And exactly right. And the reality is that what generative AI, if we just take the basics of generative AI, right, you type in something, you get some responses back. It's on the web, it's just getting stuff from the web. Which they could get via a Google search or a Bing search, right? So it's actually no different there. If there's child protection issues with, the stuff on the web, then there's going to be the same issues with the stuff in generative AI. So I think, that can be overblown a little bit. But I do think it's important that people understand a little bit more about the technology and what it can do. So, for example, the idea for, educators using Copilot with data protection, so I'm talking about web now, or ChatGPT Pro, I think it's called, where you pay $20 a month and you get data protection. That should be the minimum for education, right? That should be the baseline. Teachers shouldn't be using just the random stuff in case they accidentally put stuff in or don't think about the idea of putting personally identifiable information in, which by the way, the personally identifiable information of itself is quite complex. Like, if anyone with effort could triangulate this data back to a person, then that's personally identifiable information. It's not that I'm putting in Daniel Anderson and here's his home address. It's like much more subtle than that is personally identifiable information. So, I would say anything that's got that data protection layer in, so Copilot with data protection, which you can get via, you've got it as a school if you've got A3 and A5, that should be the baseline, right? And that protects that a little bit.
But is that baseline driven from the school, like a school, or is that where does that get driven from?
So you have to enable it within a tenant. Yep. So if you've got the license, then you can just say, yes, I want to turn on data protection. And then the difference is that the educators would log into Copilot for the web as their work. And that's what ticks it over to be data protection. Then you see a little green thing saying this is safe and whatever. And so none of your prompts go out. None of your prompts are saved. None of the results of what comes back from generative AI are saved, whatever. So that should be the sort of starting point. The second part of your question, which I can't quite remember, you said, first thing is, should people be concerned, or are schools showing some concern about it?
Yeah, and I guess just around the security aspect and accessing data that they shouldn't. Yeah.
Look, you're right. The only difference I would say about M365 Copilot having access to your Office graph and the files that you have access to on the network, the only difference is that in the past you may have access to something accidentally, which is 10 folders deep in a SharePoint library you don't even know exists. Yeah. But now it'll just pop up whenever you're asking for files. Yeah. So that is the data governance stuff is coming to the fore. The security stuff is coming to the fore. And we sort of talk to customers about the idea that, all of that is foundational to you can't get on the AI bandwagon until you've got that stuff right. Because if you don't have it right, then you in the end, you'll have to unpick it, and it'll be a pretty arduous task. You've got to make sure that sort of stuff is taken care of. Yeah,
well, that kind of leads into the next question, or the next topic, I guess, is what the leaders and what the schools need to do to actually prepare for. There's a lot of value proposition for Edu, without a doubt. What's your recommendation around for leaders or schools in general to get prepared for rolling it out?
Yeah, I think it depends on the audience, right? The first thing is you've got to have be having the conversation. Most school leaders I've seen are, having the conversation. The danger is that it's not coming from and this is not a criticism, it's because it's an emerging tech that 12 months ago we weren't even talking about really, is that most of the opinions that are happening in schools aren't coming from a place of knowledge.
Yeah.
And so the first thing to do as a school leader is get yourself across it. Like go to a few sessions that you may think aren't about you, that aren't for you, that are a webinar about generative AI and how it works, so you can understand all the security and safety and privacy stuff, and just so that you're making informed decisions and whatever. The second thing is getting some training on it. Like we have courses for educators. That was the other part of the question you asked about students, whether there's programs happening for students. Yes, we have seen programs happening for students. Some schools are doing a great job of changing curriculum in things like IT to talk about more of these ethical considerations around AI, and starting to evaluate different large language models for their accuracy. And, so they're doing some quite deep work, and that's all going to prepare kids, of course. We've released a student toolkit. It's for teachers to use to help students understand the basics. I think it's from 12 to 18 years old. So there's lots of stuff out there. And similarly for IT teams, because as I said before about Microsoft sort of being a platform where you can build your own, that's the future of this stuff. This technology, generative AI, is going to become so pervasive in everything you use, we'll eventually stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Because you'll just assume that this is in.
Or become a commodity, right? Yeah.
It's just part of everything we do. And so then people will start to specialize into building their own. Now, there's lots and lots of training and stuff out there for IT specialists and people to get into. But I think, for school leaders, for example, it's about being open to the conversation. I mean, I was saying to teachers to school leaders early on, 6 months ago, that if you were to survey your staff and say, who's using these kinds of generative AI tools now? What are you using them for? And why haven't we got big posters around the staff room wall that say, here's 10 ways to save yourself 20 minutes a day? That's what we should do. Now, provided it's safe and secure and you've got all those other things ticked off and you understand enough about that to have an informed conversation, we should be celebrating the ways that teachers can take a load off.
Because I imagine schools would be stopping the access or trying to stop the access to this type of technology because they don't know how to use it or how to control it or all of that sort of stuff. So I'm sure that's still happening. Yeah.
In some schools, yeah, but most schools and systems have actually come to the realization that prohibition never worked. It's not. Yeah. And so it's become so pervasive and whatever. The interesting thing that it's doing is prompting a very different conversation about learning and about assessment. That's a really interesting thing.
Okay.
And so the way that assessment is conducted is an interesting conversation, may go back to more doing stuff in front of me in class, as opposed to homework tasks, the type of questions. I mean, it's interesting. We used to talk about this back in the day, when, as you referred to before, when we were working together, this idea around plagiarism, right? Plagiarism's been there as, since Daniel was a boy. And I remember sitting down, don't tell Mrs. Porter, but my grade 4 teacher, but I remember sitting down at the dining room table, copying stuff out of an encyclopedia onto my poster about Columbia. Let's get that on the lowdown, right? But then with the internet, it became, much easier, and Wikipedia and all these other sites. And that was going to be the end of the world at the time because, the printing press back in the day was a problem because they were saying, what do you mean we're giving all knowledge to everyone in books? What's my job going to be? I'm the prophet of all knowledge. So this is kind of these ebbs and flows have kind of happened over time. And I think what now happens is that we've got to start reassessing what it is to assess. Like I've always said that my kids, I taught year 12 psychology for many years, and I've always said that an exam is not the best way for me to uncover what my year 12s know about psychology. I would rather repurpose that 2.5 hours that they sat an exam to have a conversation with a kid, and I'll tell you what they know about it. Yeah. The problem is that doesn't scale, right? You can't scale that. And so there's got to be different ways that we do assessment as a result of this technology now. It's the same argument with calculators back in the day. Remember when, Graph, what do you mean kids having calculators? They won't understand how to do any maths. Actually, what's happened is that they can now access higher levels of maths than they were ever able to before. And my wife's a maths teacher, and I see the stuff that they're doing on their graphics calculators now, which is implied knowledge. is less about the number crunching in some bits of maths and more about understanding which numbers you need to crunch with what kind of formula and then get the crunching done. So I think it's an evolution. This is the next phase. This is the next evolution. I think, schools were banning it initially because they didn't really understand it, and fair enough, like they didn't know. Now most schools have come to a point where they're going, look, let's put some guidelines around it. And the Australian framework for generative AI has been released, ratified by the ministers in October last year, and that's a nice framework. The only challenge I have with it, it's a very good document, but it's just a bit high level for your individual school to look at that and go, well, that makes sense. Well, that because there's no actual, it doesn't dribble down into practice, like therefore don't do this, or therefore use this, or therefore make sure that that's a consideration. It doesn't go down to that level. So lots of the systems around the country are doing that bit of work on behalf of their schools. Like the departments of education have got someone looking at that overarching framework and going, what does this mean for us? I just read an article today from Melbourne Archdiocese of Catholic Schools, and Danielle Purdy had written about the way that they're landing that overarching framework into Max schools in Melbourne. So I can understand why it's been blocked, but I think that there's going to be some big conversations to be had around assessment, both in K-12 and higher ed, by the way.
Yeah. So, and around that sort of the AI usage governance and frameworks and things, I'm assuming schools will sort of take that overarching information and then just tailor things. It'll change on a school.
Many of them already have, that's right. And they'll make their own rules around it. About what they see as acceptable or not acceptable. Because some schools are priding themselves on innovation in this space and embedding it as much as they can to give the kids exposure to, what their future will be like, et cetera, and some are more conservative. And that's always been the way with schools in education, forever. So they're definitely grabbing that sort of generative AI framework and looking at the way that it lands in their community and in their context.
Now, as we're wrapping things up, mate, I'm assuming you've been using Copilot for a while now. So how are you using it, and where are you personally finding sort of the time saving aspect of it, and in which context?
Yep. So I think in the Outlook, the thing I described before about summarizing emails, because I get added to the end of a thread and that's so annoying. So I definitely use it for that. And also the other thing I'll say is that I saw an amazing message from someone the other day. I'll see if I can find it on the side here, but I can give you the summary of it. The way my brain works, like I suffer from visual crowding. Like, reading is something that is hard for me, even though I've got a university degree and whatever. It's effort. So any sort of time saving I can make around summarizing stuff, getting the key points out of things, I use it. Because it just saves me a long time. Very slow reader. I'm the kid who says, yes, I'm finished reading that at school when I hadn't actually finished reading it because I was going too slow. Understanding, but going too slow.
And how people ask me this all the time, how accurate are you finding those summaries? Is it, missing things, or, I think that's a concern some executives have is, that they'll use the summary, the summarization of meetings or things like that, but they're still a little bit concerned about, missing certain things.
Stuff, yeah. I find them pretty good. Ultimately, the message with any of this stuff is it's not as good as your human brain. Yeah. So if you actually are worried about that, then read every word. Go for your life. Yeah. But we've got to kind of work out as humans at the moment which bits are we willing to outsource to AI and which bits aren't we. Yeah. And I think I'm down on a different track now, but I think in different industries and in different jobs within industries, there's going to be like a sliding scale. Outsource everything to AI. I don't think anyone wants to do that. Do everything as a human. Well, we're annoyed by that now. So where's this, where's the line? And so if you think about education, right, and the construct of being an educator, I was thinking about NAPLAN, right, marking NAPLAN essays and stuff. As an assessor, you have to sit there and read the whole thing and then make some assessments about that kid's ability to write or comprehend or whatever. Imagine if a summary with a level of accuracy of 99.7 or whatever the threshold is, could be given to me as the assessor And then I make a final human intervention around what that summary says. I can go back and read stuff if I want. If I want to clarify things, it's all referenced back to but it's giving me a sense or a flavor. Is that going to be enough? Is that okay? Is that not okay? These are the psychological decisions we've got to make to go, what's the purpose of me being involved in this process? One of the reasons you might be involved in that process, if it's your kids in your classroom, is because there's a lot of tacit knowledge you gain about that kid just by having to read it, right? And you understand more about them every time you read a piece of their work. And maybe you don't want to relinquish reading a piece of their work and read a summary because you lose all the nuances in the way that they structure or don't structure sentences. You're down a philosophical pathway now, but I think that's interesting. But so some of the ways I save myself time are in those summaries, catching up on emails. What are the most important things? If I'm looking for something that someone mentioned, but I can't remember where, which is often the case with modern use of technology, is because it could have been a Teams chat. It might have been a text message, which it wouldn't pick up on in Copilot for M365. But, it could be a Teams chat, email. It could have been not in a direct chat with that person. It could have been in a conversation. It could have been a meeting transcript. And so that stuff saves me a lot of time catching up on things that way. And I think starting to get the tools like Office to start generating outputs for me to get content, to get it a little bit down the path a bit further than I would have started with a blank page. So I think they're probably some of the main ways. I was looking for something, I couldn't find it because I'm unitasking as a classic male. But there was an amazing post internally at Microsoft by a guy who started to use Copilot, and he's, instead of writing 57 emails, he's now writing 200 emails. And instead of it taking him this long, it's now taking him much shorter time and whatever. And what you learn at the end of this email is that he's got cerebral palsy.
Oh, right.
And so it used to take him so long to draft emails and things from scratch that now he can spend the 3 minutes typing in a prompt into the Copilot and get quite an established bit of work out of that would have taken him 40 minutes to type because of his disability. So there's lots of these sorts of gains that we're seeing as well. So it's a pretty exciting time. There's a video that we have about some of our accessibility tools that says, this is the best time in human history to be disabled. And it's because of the advent of these technologies. Not just that, but lots of other technologies that are available for people to support them. So lots of ways that I'm using it to save time. And we've had access to it for a little while now. And it's a muscle, right? You get better at it and you start to...
And are you using it every day? So it's becoming sort of habitual in some way, shape or form?
Yeah, it is. And there's also like support within the M365 Copilot that, more prompts comes up and sort of takes you to and then based on your role and your context, you get sort of contextualized ideas for how to use Copilot to save yourself some time. So it's really catching up on meetings. Like the idea that I accept. So one of the challenges we have now, right? You get invited to a meeting that's online. You can say, yes, I'll attend. No, I won't, which seems rude. Maybe, which confuses everyone. But the reason you do maybe is often what you actually want is to say, I can't attend, but I do want to catch up. So leave it in my calendar, please, right? And so when I go back in and use Teams recap and then start to get that recap, look at the video, it's got the timeline of who was speaking when, it's got the automatically generated notes, it's got the to-do list that's created by AI. That stuff saves me hours because there are multiple meetings I can't attend that I know I should. So, lots of ways to save time.
Last one, licensing. Any for education? Same, or
it's the same at the moment. I haven't heard anything that's going to change, but it is the same as corporate, the same as everyone at the moment. So it's the same price per license.
Very good.
Which is a challenge because of the context of the way Microsoft normally licenses for education, which is at a much reduced rate versus commercial.
Definitely. Now, last thing, if people want to either follow you, get in contact with you, or just stay up to date with everything that's happening with Copilot and Edu, where's the best place? You
can connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to. So just search for Travis D. Smith, I think I am. So hit me up on LinkedIn and follow, and we post stuff on there all the time. And then the Microsoft Education channels as well on socials are a good place to go. So just look those up on whatever platform you're on to stay up to date. And also, if you're really keen on it, there's the Microsoft Education blog. So if you want to hear stories around education specifically, then just sort of Google that, and you'll find Microsoft Education blog, and bookmark that and check back, because all of the relevant stories about how this technology and others, of course, are being used in education will go through there. And then there's also just the Microsoft blogs. So if you're into the product stuff, and I mean, most of the IT folks out there know this because they're sort of ravenous finders of information. They have to be around lots of different tool sets they use, Microsoft's and others. So they're probably well across where to get informed about some of the stuff from Microsoft there. But there's lots of different places to stay up to date.
Cool. I'll put all those in the notes as well, so for everybody you can check those out. But Trav, been a good chat, mate, and thanks for jumping on.
No worries. Thanks, Ando.